Hello and welcome to this week's devotional. Have you ever felt isolated or alone? It can be a difficult and challenging experience, causing us to question our worth and purpose. However, as believers, we can find comfort in knowing that God's isolation is not a rejection, but rather a way for Him to work in our lives and prepare us for His glory. In the journey of faith, God often calls and sets apart individuals for specific missions and purposes. Throughout the scriptures, we find examples of how God isolated His servants for a greater calling. Let's explore some of these instances and understand the significance of God's isolation. 1. Moses, isolated for leadership. One of the most well-known examples is the story of Moses. After he fled from Egypt, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, isolated from society. During this time, God prepared him to lead the Israelites out of slavery and into the Promised Land. Through isolation, Moses learned humility, dependence on God, and gained the necessary wisdom to fulfill his calling. 2. Elijah, isolated for renewal. Elijah, a prophet of God, experienced a period of isolation in the wilderness. After a great victory over the prophets of Baal, Elijah found himself discouraged and exhausted. In his isolation, God provided for him, renewed his strength, and reminded him of his purpose. Through this time of solitude, Elijah was prepared for future challenges and continued to fulfill God's plan for his life. 3. Jesus, isolated for temptation. Even Jesus, the Son of God, experienced isolation and solitude. Before he began his public ministry, Jesus spent 40 days and nights in the wilderness, fasting and being tempted by the devil. This period of isolation allowed Jesus to overcome temptation, strengthen his resolve, and fully embrace his mission to save humanity through his sacrificial death and resurrection. These examples demonstrate that God's isolation is not a punishment, but rather a purposeful act to prepare his servants for his glory. It is during these times of solitude that we can grow in our relationship with God, deepen our faith, and become more aligned with his will. So, why does God isolate us? Here are a few possible reasons. 1. Removing distractions. In the busyness of life, we often find ourselves surrounded by distractions that hinder our spiritual growth. God may isolate us to remove these distractions and create an environment where we can focus solely on Him. It is in this solitude that we can hear His voice more clearly and discern His direction for our lives. 2. Building character. Isolation can be a refining process, shaping our character and molding us into the image of Christ. In the quietness of solitude, God works on our hearts, addressing areas of pride, selfishness, and unbelief. Through this process, we become more humble, compassionate, and dependent on Him. 3. Developing intimacy. When we are alone with God, our intimacy with Him deepens. In the absence of distractions, we can pour out our hearts, share our deepest fears and desires, and experience His love and faithfulness in a profound way. God's isolation allows us to cultivate a deeper relationship with Him and rely on His strength and guidance. It is important to remember that God's isolation is not permanent. Just as He isolated His servants for a specific purpose, He will also bring us out of isolation when the time is right. In the meantime, let us embrace the solitude and trust that God is working in us for His glory. So remember, God's isolation is not a rejection but a divine strategy to prepare us for His purposes. Through isolation, we can experience growth, renewal, and a deeper intimacy with God. Let us trust in His plan and embrace the solitude, knowing that we are called and set apart for His glory. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe to this channel, and share with your friends and loved ones. See you in the next video.